The paper slid across the desk so slowly, it felt like time had stopped. The weight of it heavier than anything I had carried in years. My hand hovered over the pen, steady in a way that only comes when you've had enough. They thought I was confused, that I couldn't tell the difference between truth and lies, between care and theft. But in that moment, I was sharper than ever. I'd waited for this. I looked at the single line where my signature was needed, knowing once I made that mark, everything would change. And without another word, I pressed the pen to the page. Thank you for being here with me today. It means more than I can ever say. And I would love to know where you are watching from, so please take a moment to tell me in the comments. And while you do, let me ask you something. Has anyone ever looked you straight in the eye and told you that you were confused? That you were mistaken? When deep down, you knew you were right? When you could feel in your bones that the truth was on your side? If you have, then you already understand why I'm telling this story. Because sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones where we have to stand firm without raising our voice, proving with quiet actions that we were never the ones who were lost. I have worked for as long as I can remember. Not because I wanted a grand life, but because I had to keep a roof over our heads after my husband passed away far too soon. I was left with 3 children to raise and a house that always seemed to need something fixed. There were no luxuries, no vacations, no careless spending, just long days and longer nights where I learned how to stretch a dollar until it felt thin as paper. I patched clothes, cooked from scratch, and took on every extra shift I could, all while smiling through the exhaustion, so no one could see how tired I truly was. Through the years, I watched as family members came and went, some with genuine kindness, but too many with hands outstretched, always needing something, always taking just a little more than they gave back. Still, I kept going, telling myself that one day the pension I had been working toward would be the safety I needed, the peace at the end of a lifetime of scraping by. When that day finally came, I didn't celebrate out loud. I didn't tell anyone, not even those closest to me, because I knew how quickly money could change the way people look at you. It was my silent victory, one I kept tucked away like a fragile secret I didn't dare to expose. I thought if I kept it quiet, I could enjoy a small, safe life without anyone trying to take a piece of it. But secrets have a way of slipping into the wrong hands, and it wasn't long before they found out. It started so simply. The kind of conversation that doesn't feel dangerous in the moment because it is wrapped in warmth and familiarity. They came over one afternoon, smiling the way people do when they have good news or a generous idea, and they sat down at my kitchen table as if they had been thinking about me all day. They said they had been talking, that they wanted to help me, that now that my pension had finally started coming in, I shouldn't have to worry about carrying heavy grocery bags or standing in long lines at the store. I remember the way their words felt soft, like a blanket being draped over my shoulders, and the way they leaned forward, lowering their voices, as though we were sharing a secret. "Let us make life easier for you," they said, and it was delivered so sweetly, I almost felt guilty for hesitating. They explained that if I gave them my card, just for groceries, they could pick up everything I needed once a week. No more worrying about the weather when I needed milk. No more waiting for a ride if I was running low on something. No more fuss. They painted such a pleasant picture. One where I could stay comfortable at home while someone else took care of those errands. I looked at them, and I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that this was kindness, that it came from love, and not from something else hidden behind those reassuring smiles. But even as I reached into my purse, I felt a faint pull in my chest, a little whisper telling me to pause, to think twice. I told myself I was being silly, that this was family, that they had never given me a reason to suspect anything so low. My fingers hesitated over the card for just a moment before I slid it across the table, watching their eyes light up in a way I chose not to question at the time. They promised it was only for groceries, nothing else. And they even laughed, saying I wouldn't have to lift a finger anymore. I smiled back, though it didn't quite reach my heart. That night, I tried to quiet the unease by telling myself I had done something good, that maybe letting someone help me was a sign of trust, of closeness. I went to bed believing that by giving them that card, I had made life easier for both of us. But I didn't know then what I know now, that in that small moment, I had opened the door to something I couldn't close again. 1 week later, when the statement arrived, I would know without a shadow of a doubt that I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The envelope came on a quiet morning, the kind where the air feels still and the light through the window is soft enough to make you think nothing bad could happen. I remember holding it in my hands, feeling the smooth paper, the faint weight of it, and knowing without knowing that something inside was going to unsettle me. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had handed over my card just a week before, and I ran my finger along the seal. The paper tore with a sound that seemed far too loud for such a calm day. I slid the statement out slowly, the pages cool between my fingers, and unfolded it until the lines of numbers and words stared back at me in neat black ink. At first, my eyes didn't quite take it in. I scanned the rows expecting to see familiar things: the grocery store down the road, the market where I buy fresh bread, maybe the pharmacy. But none of those names were there. Instead, there were charges that didn't belong to my life: a luxury resort several states away, another at the coast, a boutique I had never heard of that sold designer handbags with prices that made my stomach tighten. And then further down, a car dealership. The model listed wasn't just any car, it was a convertible. I sat there for a moment, the edges of the paper trembling in my hands, trying to piece together what I was looking at. It wasn't just spending. It was spending without a single thought of the hours I had worked, the years I had counted pennies, the sacrifices I had made so that this pension would mean security, not scraps. 40 years of labor, and in a matter of days, it was being eaten away by someone else's indulgence. I felt a hollow ache deep in my chest, not the sharp pain of shock but the slow, heavy weight of betrayal settling in. They hadn't even tried to hide it. There was no attempt to disguise the charges, no care in covering the tracks, almost as if they believed I wouldn't notice or wouldn't understand what I was looking at. I sat there for a long time, my eyes tracing each transaction, the names and amounts blurring together until they were just symbols of how little my trust had meant to them. I thought about the way they had smiled at me, the softness in their voices when they said they wanted to make life easier, and how I had wanted to believe every word. That wanting had cost me more than I could measure in money. And yet, even with the anger beginning to warm in my veins, I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't march to their door. I didn't send a message. No, I folded the statement carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and set it aside. Confrontation could wait. Rage could wait. Because this wasn't going to be a loud fight at a kitchen table or a burst of accusations over the phone. This was going to be something else entirely. I just needed time to decide how far I was willing to go. When I finally brought it up, I chose my words carefully. I didn't go in with accusations. I simply held the statement in my hands and asked if they could explain these charges, these resorts, these stores, this car that had nothing to do with my life. I thought, just for a moment, that I might see guilt in their eyes, that they might stammer out some apology or at least an excuse worth hearing. Instead, they looked at me with a strange mix of amusement and pity, the kind of expression you reserve for someone you think can't quite keep their thoughts straight. One of them actually chuckled under their breath before saying, "Mom, you must have clicked something, maybe on the computer or the phone, you probably don't remember. It happens." The words landed like a slap, not because they were loud or cruel, but because they were coded in that gentle, patronizing tone that strips you of your dignity while pretending to care. I watched them exchange those quick, knowing glances, the ones that seem to pass an unspoken agreement right over your head as if you're not sharp enough to notice. They spoke slowly, as though they were explaining something to a child, saying I must have misunderstood, that sometimes the bank makes errors, that these things could all be sorted out easily if I just let them handle it. And all the while, those faint smirks tugged at the corners of their mouths, like they were in on some private joke, and I was the punchline. For a moment, I felt the familiar ache in my chest, The hurt that comes when people you've loved your whole life decide that your trust is an open door they can walk through and pillage. But then something shifted deep inside me, slow and quiet, like a door locking from the inside. The hurt was still there, but it was no longer the kind that makes you crumble. It began to harden, to cool into something deliberate. I realized in that moment that this wasn't a misunderstanding, and it wasn't a mistake. They weren't just taking my money. They were trying to take my clarity, my sense of reality, making me doubt my own mind so I wouldn't question them again. I let them talk, nodding here and there as if I were following along, keeping my face calm so they couldn't see the shift happening in me. Inside, though, my thoughts were sharpening into a plan. If they wanted to treat me like I was confused, I would let them, because people who think you're lost will never notice you finding your way to the exit with everything they thought they'd taken. I realized right then that I wouldn't raise my voice, I wouldn't argue, and I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would play along until I was ready, and when the moment came, they wouldn't even see it coming. The very next morning, before the sun had fully stretched across the sky, I put on my coat, slipped the statement into my handbag, and walked to the bus stop without telling a soul where I was going. The air was cool, sharp enough to keep me awake, and I remember holding on to that feeling, letting it cut through the fog of anger so I could think clearly. When I reached the bank, the familiar chime above the door greeted me, and I made my way to the counter with slow, deliberate steps. I placed the envelope down in front of the teller, a young woman with eyes far too kind to belong to the business of numbers and debt. I asked her for every single transaction tied to my account, every receipt, every note in the system. I wanted the exact dates, the times, the locations. I wanted the truth written down in a way that couldn't be denied or twisted into some convenient story. She didn't rush me, didn't look impatient. Instead, she glanced at the papers I'd brought, then back at me with a soft look that told me she had seen this before. Maybe too many times. Her voice lowered, almost gentle, as she said, "I'll get you everything you need." And I knew, without her saying another word, that she understood exactly what was happening. While she disappeared into the back, I stood there, hands resting on the cool counter, thinking about the years I had trusted without question, the years I had given without keeping count. My mind was calm now, almost unnervingly so, as though something inside me had shifted from hurt to resolve. When she returned, she laid the stack of papers in front of me, thick enough to feel like a book. Each page was a piece of the puzzle, and together they told a story I had already begun to suspect. Every hotel, every boutique, every drop of fuel for that shiny new car was there in black and white, each one a nail in the coffin of the trust I had once held. I thanked her quietly, slid the papers back into my bag, and stepped outside. The sky had turned brighter, but to me, the world felt sharper, like it was finally in focus. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, taking a deep breath, then reached into my bag for my phone. My fingers moved without hesitation as I scrolled to a number I hadn't called in years. An old friend, who had once been the kind of person you'd want on your side in any fight, and who now made their living as a lawyer. When they answered, their voice carried the same steady confidence I remembered from decades ago. I didn't waste time with small talk. I didn't explain the whole story, because I knew that would come later, in an office with the door closed and the papers spread out between us. All I said was, "It's time," and there was a pause on the other end, just long enough for me to know they understood exactly what I meant. Then came the quiet reply, "Come in tomorrow, we'll handle it." And for the first time in days, I felt the faint stirrings of control returning to me, not because the damage had been undone, but because I had just taken the first real step toward taking everything back. The next day, I sat in his office, a place that smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, the kind of scent that makes you think of quiet strength and decisions that change lives. He was older now, like me, but his eyes were still sharp, the kind that could cut through any performance or lie in an instant. I laid the stack of papers on his desk, each one a piece of my trust that had been twisted and stolen. And I told him everything. I didn't rush, I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't leave out a single detail. From the moment they asked for my card to the moment I saw those first charges, I unfolded the story in order, letting him see it the way I had lived it. He didn't interrupt. Not once. He just sat there, leaning back in his chair, his hands folded loosely, his gaze never leaving mine. The silence between my sentences didn't make him impatient, it made him listen harder. And when I finally stopped speaking, when there was nothing left but the sound of the clock on the wall ticking away the seconds, he reached forward, took the top page of the statement, and began to read through them with the kind of focus you would give to something worth fighting for. After a few minutes, he set the papers down, looked me directly in the eyes and said, "You're not crazy, not even close. This is deliberate, calculated, and it's meant to make you doubt yourself so you won't push back." There was no pity in his voice, no hesitation, just the steady assurance of someone who had seen this kind of betrayal before and knew exactly how to dismantle it. He leaned in slightly, lowering his tone, and continued. "One signature, and we lock the accounts. We freeze every access they have, and then we take the next steps to reverse what they've done." He explained each part in simple, clear words, outlining exactly how we would contact the bank, what forms would need to be signed, how the card would be canceled, and how the dealership and stores could be reached to undo the transactions. He spoke of laws that would work in my favor, protections I didn't even know existed, and the way we could use their own arrogance against them. As he laid out the plan, I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I hadn't even realized I'd been holding since that first moment I saw the charges. There was a steadiness in his tone, the kind that reminded me I wasn't walking into this fight alone. He assured me that we would keep every step quiet until the work was already done, that there would be no warning for them, no chance to run or hide or spin another story. I listened to each detail, committing them to memory, and for the first time in a long while I could see the path ahead of me, not as a blur of uncertainty but as a clear, deliberate route to justice. When he finished, he pushed a single sheet of paper toward me, much like the one he had given me years ago when he helped me with something far less personal, and he said simply, "We start tomorrow." The words hung in the air like a promise, solid and unshakable, and in that moment, I knew I was ready, not just to take my money back, but to take back the part of myself they thought they could strip away. The next few days became a quiet performance, one I played with more patience than I thought I had left in me. While my lawyer began the paperwork, contacted the bank, and set the wheels in motion to freeze the accounts, I went about my daily routine as if nothing at all had changed. When they called or stopped by, I made sure to keep my voice light, a little unsure, even letting my sentences trail off now and then, as if I had lost my train of thought. I could see it in their eyes, that subtle satisfaction of believing they were in control, of thinking I was too distracted or too tired to notice what they were doing. They still used the card, swiping it with the ease of someone spending their own money, blissfully unaware that every purchase was being tracked, that each receipt was another thread my lawyer was winding into the rope they were tying around themselves. I let them tell me what they'd bought, listened to the stories of little trips they had taken, or the dinners they had enjoyed, nodding as though it was all news to me. Inside, there was a stillness, a quiet strength building as I realized they were digging deeper into a hole they wouldn't be able to climb out of once the truth came crashing down on them. There were moments that almost made me smile, though I kept it hidden. Like when they bragged about a new piece of jewelry, not knowing it was already on the list of items my lawyer had flagged for return. Or when they mentioned the convertible as if it were some reward they had earned, unaware that the dealership had already been contacted. Each boast, each casual display of their spending became a small victory for me, because I knew exactly how temporary their joy was. I made tea, I asked polite questions, I even thanked them for picking up a few things for me at the store, all while knowing that in a matter of days, their access would vanish. It was a strange kind of control, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the steady, patient control of someone who has already set the trap and is simply waiting for it to close. Let them shop. Let them smile. Let them think they had me fooled. The beauty of it was that they had no idea just how close they were to losing everything they thought they had taken. When the day finally came to return to my lawyer's office, the air felt different, heavier somehow, as if the world itself understood what I was about to do. I walked in carrying not just the folder of documents we had prepared, but the weight of 40 years of work, sacrifice, and trust that had been shattered. His office was warm and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel the gravity of the moment before a single word is spoken. He greeted me with that steady, unshakable look I had come to rely on over the past week, then gestured for me to sit. On his desk, right in the center, was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't thick, it didn't look extraordinary, but I knew it carried more power than anything I had held in my hands for a very long time. He slid it toward me with a deliberate motion, the same way you might pass something sacred or final. I looked down at the line waiting for my signature, and for a moment, my eyes lingered there. Not because I doubted what I was doing, but because I could feel the history behind it. Every long shift I had worked, every bill I had paid late to keep food on the table, every time I'd gone without so someone else could have what they needed, all of it seemed to gather in the ink that was about to touch the page. The pen felt heavier than it should, not with hesitation, but with the memory of everything that had led me here. My hand was steady, my breathing even, and as I pressed the tip to the paper, I thought about their faces, the smug certainty they wore when they believed I was too confused to protect myself. I thought about the resort rooms I never stayed in, the handbags I never carried, the car I never drove, and the way they had spent my hard-earned money as if it were theirs by right. And then I signed. It was done in seconds, the kind of act that looks small from the outside, but changes everything in an instant. He took the paper, gave a single nod, and said, "That's it. The accounts are frozen. They can't touch a cent. We'll move on the assets and repayment next." His voice was calm, but there was a quiet satisfaction in it, a recognition that we had just closed the door they had been walking through so freely. I sat there for a moment longer, letting the weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't all over yet, but the tide had turned. They had stolen from me for the last time, and though they didn't know it yet, the life they had been enjoying on my back was about to disappear piece by piece until there was nothing left for them to take. It didn't take long for them to show up at my door, and when they did, there was no knocking, just the sound of hurried footsteps on the porch and voices raised before I even reached the handle. I opened the door to see them standing there, faces red with anger, words tumbling over each other so fast they barely made sense at first. But then the clearest one broke through the noise, sharp and demanding. "We can't access the card. What did you do?" Their eyes were wide, not with confusion like they had pretended to see in me, but with panic, the kind that comes when the ground you thought was yours suddenly disappears beneath your feet. I stood there, not moving from my spot, my hand still resting lightly on the edge of the door. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let a single tremor of emotion leak into my tone. Instead, I answered in the same even, measured way I might use to discuss the weather. "I protected myself." The words were simple, but I watched them land like stones in a pond, rippling through whatever script they had prepared for this moment. They sputtered at first, each one trying to talk over the other, throwing out excuses, blaming the bank, suggesting it was all some sort of mix-up. Then the threats began, their voices tightening as they warned me about how hard I was making things, how I was overreacting, how I was going to regret this. I listened to it all without flinching, my expression steady, my hands folded in front of me as if I had all the time in the world. When the threats didn't work, the pleading started. Their voices softened, their eyes widened, and they tried to dress their words in the same kind of sweetness they had used the day they asked for my card. They talked about family, about trust, about how they were only ever trying to help. But I heard it differently now, every word another thread in the same net they had tried to wrap around me. I didn't step aside to let them in, and I didn't take a single step closer. I simply held their gaze and repeated more slowly this time, "I protected myself." Then I let the silence stretch, long enough for them to feel its weight. They shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, looking for a way to salvage what they had lost, but there was nothing left for them here. Eventually, the words ran out, replaced by the sound of their frustration, in the scrape of shoes on the porch and the sharp slam of the gate as they left. I closed the door gently, not with relief exactly, but with the certainty that whatever storm they tried to bring back to my doorstep, they would find me unmoved. The door was locked now. Not just the one in my house, but the one they had been walking through for far too long. The days that followed felt different, not because the world around me had changed much, but because the noise that had been pressing in on me for so long was finally gone. The first sign came quietly, through a simple phone call from my lawyer. His voice was steady as always, but there was a trace of satisfaction in it when he told me the convertible had been repossessed without issue. The dealership hadn't needed much convincing once the paperwork was shown, and by the end of the week, it was sitting back in their lot as if it had never been mine to lose. Not long after, the designer bags were returned as well, each one neatly repackaged and sent back to the store where they belonged. Those purchases that had once been paraded around like trophies were nothing more than transactions reversed and forgotten by everyone, except the ones who had thought they could get away with it. I began doing my own shopping again, walking slowly through the aisles of the grocery store, touching the produce, checking prices, choosing the things I actually needed instead of imagining what they might have picked for me. There was something grounding about it. The simple act of placing a loaf of bread and a carton of milk into my basket, knowing they had been bought with my own hands, with no shadow of deceit hanging over them. These were real groceries, not the kind that came with an unspoken price attached. I paid at the counter, tucked the receipt into my purse, and left the store with a sense of independence I hadn't realized I'd missed. At home, the air seemed lighter. The phone didn't ring with sudden requests for help. There were no surprise visits with stories about urgent needs or emergencies that always ended with me reaching for my wallet. The knocks at my door had stopped, replaced by the quiet hum of my own company, the soft sounds of my home settling in the evenings. I moved through my days without glancing over my shoulder, without wondering what would be missing next, and in that stillness, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't a loud victory. There was no celebration, no raised voices or pointed speeches. It was the kind of victory you carry inside yourself, knowing you held your ground when it mattered most, and that you came out with your dignity, your security, and your clarity intact. They could keep their justifications, their stories, their excuses. I had my life back, and it was worth more than anything they had tried to take from me. They thought kindness meant weakness, that because I was willing to give, I would never take back. They mistook my patience for blind trust, my silence for not seeing. But what they never understood was that kindness is not the absence of strength. It is the choice to use it carefully. Sometimes kindness is just patience, waiting for the right moment to take everything back in a way that leaves no room for argument, no chance for the truth to be twisted. I didn't need to shout, I didn't need to prove myself in their eyes, because the moment I acted, the truth spoke louder than anything I could have said. This whole experience taught me something I wish I had learned earlier in life, something I hope no one else has to discover the hard way. You have to protect what you've earned, not just from strangers or those you already know are untrustworthy, but sometimes from the people who share your table, who smile at you across the room, who say they only want what is best for you. Love and trust are beautiful things, but they should never come at the expense of your own security. No one should have more access to your life than you are willing to lose if they decide to betray you. I think about the years it took to build what I had, and how quickly it could have been gone forever if I had believed their version of events, if I had let them convince me I was mistaken, that my own mind could not be trusted. That is how it happens to so many. Not with a single bold theft, but with small steps, each one dressed as help, each one designed to make you question yourself. The moment you feel that unease, listen to it. It will save you from much more than just losing money. Now my home is quiet, My accounts are safe, and the balance has shifted back where it belongs. I still live simply, still keep my days calm and steady, but I do it on my own terms, with no one holding the keys to what I have built. They can live with the choices they made. I will live with the peace I fought for. And if you are listening to this, wondering whether it is worth it to stand your ground, I can tell you without hesitation. It is. If you have ever taken back what was yours, tell me below, or just write, "I took it back." And if you want to hear more stories like this, stay here with me and subscribe, because there will always be more to tell, and I will always be here to tell them. Thank you for watching.